We begin this half hour with an eye-opening report on American colleges and fraternities. They have been around for nearly 200 years. The first was established in 1825.
One of the nation's largest fraternities, Sigma Alpha Epsilon, announced yesterday it's banning pledging, effective tomorrow. Bloomberg reports more SAE pledges died, at least 10 since 2006, than any other fraternity.
Journalist Flanagan spent a year researching the campus power wielded by frats, and her article, The Dark Power of Fraternities, is the cover story of this month's The Atlantic magazine.
Caitlin, good morning.
Good morning.
Caitlin, you say in your article that in many substantive ways, fraternities are now mightier than the colleges and universities that host them. Why is that?
Well, in the first place, they provide this huge amount of student housing that the schools don't have to pay for. 1 in 8 of every American undergraduates lives in Greek housing, and colleges don't have to pay for that housing, maintain it, or insure it. And getting rid of all that housing would be a huge problem for the colleges. The other big fact is that fraternity men give huge amounts of money to their alma maters. And if a college president does something to the fraternity chapter that the fraternity men don't like, they'll cut the money off instantly and redirect it to the fraternity, not to the colleges. So the college presidents aren't as powerful against fraternities as people often think.
It was fascinating in your article because it seems like what you really did is you followed the money. You basically went to insurance companies and looked at liability claims. So let's start off there. I mean, where are all the problems? What are the biggest things these universities are seeing happening?
Well, I had assumed before I wrote the piece that hazing was the #1 problem, because that's what you always read, these very bizarre, almost sadistic cases of inflicted trauma. But when I looked at these internal documents of the fraternity industry, hazing is the least common problem. It's only 7%. Most common is assault and battery. These kids get liquored up and they get in horrible fights. There's a kid who's been in a coma in Pennsylvania just the last few days. He broke up a fight at the frat house. Somebody punched him, roundhouse punch. He hit the cement. He's in a coma. Very desperate situation. That's #1. #2, right there in their records, sexual assault. 15% of all claims are young women coming forward and saying, I was sexually assaulted at the fraternity house. So I think parents, particularly of daughters, need to understand that the fraternity industry is quite explicit about the huge amount of sexual assault claims that they're dealing with. And they're not coming forward and saying these are insubstantive claims. For the most part, they're paying these claims.
Well, let's talk about insurance for a minute, because when students join fraternities, they're required to take out insurance, correct?
Right.
But it doesn't really cover them in many cases?
The general assumption by their parents who are back home is that, okay, this insurance will protect my son should he get involved in a nasty piece of litigation, if the worst should happen. In fact, the insurance they pay for protects the fraternity against their son. If their son makes a huge mistake and the fraternity's held liable, the insurance he paid into is going to help pay the fraternity's part of the claim. Well, the actual young man is going to get cut from insurance immediately, probably dropped from the fraternity, and believe it or not, probably the single most surprising thing I've learned is that the sum of money that pays his damages is his parents' homeowner's insurance.
Why does he get cut? If he's broken a rule, they can just say, you've broken a rule, we can cut you?
Right, exactly. All fraternities share common risk management policies. They're extremely strict. The kind of behavior that's expected legally of a fraternity man is so squeaky clean, few of us would pass it today, let alone when we were college students.
Right.
So there's a huge gulf between the risk management policy and life as it's actually lived on these campus fraternity houses.
You know, when I read you talking about the risk management policies, what struck me as interesting, though, is it's almost like these really detailed rules are in place, almost as though they are anticipating sexual assaults. They're anticipating. I mean, they give these students step-by-step instructions. If someone dies, here's who you call. If someone is raped, this is exactly what you do. I mean, it seems almost like the national chapters just want their fingerprints off of it. It's not really about risk assessment.
I think in the worst case scenario, we can look at these risk management policies as very cynical, almost a cynical hoax perpetrated by the nationals, as though they can say, look, we don't support or approve of any of these kinds of behaviors. Yet parents across America are looking at report after report after report. There were 2 very serious allegations of rape in a Yale fraternity house a few days ago by young women at elite campuses, huge public campuses, obscure small private schools. There's just report after report. And I think parents in America are starting to say, enough. We want the system reformed if our kids are going to be a part of it or even around it.
So what should universities do, if anything, Caitlin?
They are in a terrible position because young men obviously have a constitutionally granted implied right, the freedom of association. So the university can't come and say, you can't belong to a private club that exists on private land. And, you know, it's sort of like saying you can't go to 7-Eleven off campus. You can go to 7-Eleven, you can go to the Elks Club, you can join the fraternity. So colleges are really in a bind, and they're kind of motivated not to get super involved in shutting them down, because the more involved they are in policing them, the more they establish a legal duty of care. And so parents can say, oh, oh, university, you understood that these things were going on. You had some monitoring in place. Therefore, when my child was injured, it's partly your fault because your monitoring fell through the cracks.
So legally, if they get more involved, they're more exposed.
Exactly right.
It really is a fascinating article, Caitlin Flanagan. Thank you so much. And of course, people can see it in The Atlantic.
Thank you very much.